I accidentally discovered my parents' will while organizing their tax documents. My heart stopped as I read the words, "All assets to be transferred to our son, Jeremy Clark." Nothing for me, Rocco, despite years of financially supporting them. The betrayal cut deep, knowing my decades of sacrifice meant nothing. I stared at the document, wondering if our entire relationship had been transactional. When my mother texted demanding money for their mortgage payment with no greeting or pleasantry, I faced a life-changing decision about continuing to support parents who had secretly disinherited me. I had always been the responsible one. While my younger brother Jeremy moved to California right after college to find himself, I stayed in Pennsylvania, less than 20 miles from our parents. My decision wasn't entirely selfless. I loved the area, had good job prospects with my engineering degree, and valued being close to family. But it meant I was the one they called when the basement flooded, or when they couldn't figure out their new smartphone. 5 years ago, everything changed when Dad had his heart attack. I remember the frantic 3 a.m. call from Mom, her voice shaking as she explained they were in an ambulance headed to St. Mary's Hospital. I arrived before they finished admitting him, finding Mom huddled in a vinyl waiting room chair, looking smaller and more fragile than I had ever seen her. Dad recovered, thankfully, but the medical bills devastated them. They had insurance, but the deductibles and co-pays added up quickly. Then came the follow-up appointments, cardiac rehabilitation, and a small pharmacy's worth of medications. "We just can't make the mortgage this month," Mom admitted over coffee in their kitchen 2 months after Dad came home. The shame in her voice was evident as she pushed the past due notice across the table. "We used our emergency fund for the medical bills." Without hesitation, I wrote a check for $3,400. "Consider it covered," I told them, watching relief wash over their faces. That was just the beginning. I paid their mortgage again 3 months later when Dad's medication dosage required expensive adjustments. Then came property taxes they couldn't quite manage, followed by the water heater that died in the middle of winter. Each time, I stepped in without complaint. Eventually, we settled into a routine. I set up an automatic transfer of $800 monthly to their account, enough to bridge the gap between their fixed retirement income and their actual expenses. I handled home repairs personally or hired professionals when needed. When their 15-year-old refrigerator finally quit, I surprised them with a new one. When their property taxes increased, I adjusted my monthly contribution accordingly. These financial responsibilities meant sacrifices on my end. I postponed buying my own home, continuing to rent a modest apartment despite having a down payment saved. I delayed pursuing a graduate degree that would have advanced my career. Vacations became weekend trips instead of proper getaways. But seeing my parents secure seemed worth every compromise. We grew closer during these years. Sunday dinners became sacred tradition. Dad and I bonded over baseball games on their living room couch, while Mom always sent me home with containers of homemade food. They expressed gratitude constantly, with Mom often squeezing my hand and saying, "We don't know what we'd do without you, Rocco." Jeremy, meanwhile, maintained minimal contact. He called on birthdays and holidays, visited perhaps once every 2 years, and occasionally sent gifts from California. But financial support? Not once. When I mentioned the situation to him after Dad's heart attack, he said his fledgling graphic design career wasn't providing stable income yet. I understood and never pressed him on it. Last month, my parents asked if I could help organize their financial records for tax season. Mom had always been meticulous with paperwork but was finding it increasingly difficult to keep track of everything. I agreed immediately, spending a Saturday afternoon at their dining room table sorting through folders and statements. That's when I found it, tucked between property tax assessments and insurance policies. A legal document dated just 6 months earlier. Their will. I wouldn't have read it except the header caught my eye. Last will and testament of Robert and Margaret Clark. Curious about their plans and wondering if they needed advice on estate planning, I skimmed the document. The world stopped when I reached the asset distribution section. "We hereby bequeath all property, financial assets, personal belongings, and interests to our son Jeremy Clark." The next paragraph specified that these assets included their home, retirement accounts, life insurance policies, and personal property. I flipped through the entire document twice, certain I had missed something, but there was nothing else. No mention of my name anywhere. No separate provision. Not even a personal memento allocated to me. According to this will, once my parents passed, everything they owned would go to my brother. The brother who hadn't contributed a single dollar to their well-being in years. The brother who couldn't be bothered to visit when Dad was in the hospital. The brother who, apparently, deserved everything while I deserved nothing. I carefully replaced the document exactly where I found it, finished organizing their records mechanically, and drove home in a daze. The next morning, my phone pinged with a text from Mom. "Can you come look at our furnace?" Making strange noises again. For a week, I wrestled with what to do about my discovery. Should I confront them? Pretend I never saw it? The betrayal felt like a physical wound, reopening every time they called asking for help or expressing how grateful they were for my support. I finally decided to address it during our Sunday dinner. I arrived at their modest two-story colonial home with a tightness in my chest, the folder containing a photocopy of their will tucked into my jacket pocket. Mom had prepared my favorite meal, lasagna with garlic bread, making what I needed to do even more difficult. We made it through dinner with standard conversation about neighborhood happenings and my work projects. As Mom brought out coffee and apple pie, I took a deep breath and placed the folder on the table. "I need to ask you both something important," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "What is it, son?" Dad asked. His fork paused midway to his mouth. I opened the folder and slid the document toward them. "I found this while organizing your financial papers last week. I'd like to understand why." Mom's face drained of color as she recognized the will. Dad's expression hardened, his jaw setting in that familiar way that signaled defensiveness. "You had no right to look at that," he said after a long silence. "I wasn't snooping," I replied. "It was mixed in with the tax documents you asked me to organize. But that's not the point. I just want to understand why, after everything, you've decided to leave everything to Jeremy and nothing to me." Mom reached for Dad's hand across the table. "Rocco, it's not what you think." "Then what is it?" "Because it seems pretty clear from this document that when you die, everything you own goes to Jeremy. The home I've helped you keep, the retirement accounts I've enabled you to maintain by covering your other expenses, all of it." Dad sighed heavily. "You're already successful, Rocco. You have a good job, savings, stability. Jeremy has struggled his whole life. His business ventures haven't worked out, and we worry about his future. So my reward for being responsible and helping you is nothing, while Jeremy gets rewarded for needing constant bailouts?" The injustice made my voice rise despite my efforts to stay calm. "We're trying to balance things out," Mom explained, her eyes pleading for understanding. "You've always been the capable one, the one who figures things out. Jeremy needs more security." "Balance things out?" I echoed in disbelief. "I've given you over $70,000 in the past 5 years alone. I've delayed my own life goals to help you maintain yours. And you think that balances out by leaving everything to Jeremy?" A new, more painful realization dawned on Dad's face. "You act like we owe you something. We paid for your college education, gave you every advantage." This stunned me into momentary silence. I worked 20 hours a week throughout college and took out student loans, which I repaid myself. "You contributed to my first semester's tuition, $5,000, which I appreciate, but I covered the rest. You know this." The conversation devolved from there. Mom cried. Dad grew increasingly defensive, and I felt a lifetime of family dynamics crystallizing into painful clarity. They had always seen Jeremy as needing more attention, more forgiveness, more support, and they had always seen me as needing less, precisely because I asked for less and gave more. As if on cue, my phone rang. Jeremy. Mom had obviously texted him during our conversation. I answered and put the phone on speaker. "What's going on?" Jeremy demanded without preamble. "Mom says you're upset about the will." "Wouldn't you be?" I asked. "They're leaving you everything, after I'm the one who's been supporting them for years." Jeremy's laugh came through the speaker, dismissive and irritating. "Oh, come on, don't be so dramatic. You're doing well. I'm struggling out here. It's only fair." "Fair would be acknowledging both of us," I countered. "Fair would be honesty about their intentions instead of letting me continue to financially support them while planning to disinherit me." "You're just being entitled," Jeremy shot back. "Nobody forced you to help them. If you were doing it expecting something in return, that's on you. The conversation continued in this vein, with Jeremy painting me as selfish and greedy, while positioning himself as the perpetual underdog. My parents nodded along with many of his points, occasionally adding comments about how they never asked for my help, untrue, and how I had volunteered it freely, technically true, but under very different assumptions about our relationship. As the argument escalated, old patterns emerged with painful clarity. Jeremy had always been the favored child, his mistakes minimized or justified, his needs prioritized. I had been the reliable one, expected to understand, to accommodate, to sacrifice. The most devastating revelation came when Mom, frustrated by my continued questions, blurted out, "We lent Jeremy $50,000 2 years ago for his business. He needed it." My mind immediately flashed to that same time period when I had needed $15,000 for dental surgery. They had claimed they couldn't help, that their fixed income wouldn't allow it. I had paid for it myself, taking out a personal loan and working overtime for months to repay it. "You told me you had no money to help with my dental surgery," I said quietly. Was that a lie? The guilty look exchanged between my parents confirmed everything. Jeremy quickly jumped in with justifications about his business needs being an investment in the future. But the damage was done. I stood up, suddenly unable to breathe in the dining room where we had shared hundreds of meals. "I need to go." "Don't be like this," Mom pleaded, reaching for my arm. "We're family." "Family," I repeated, the word tasting bitter. "Is that what this feels like to you?" I left without another word, their protests following me out the door. In my car, I sat with my hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to process how the people I trusted most had betrayed me so completely. Not just with the will, but with years of calculated decisions that consistently prioritized Jeremy, while taking my support for granted. My phone buzzed with text messages from both parents and Jeremy, but I couldn't bring myself to read them. Instead, I drove home through the familiar streets of my hometown, seeing everything through new eyes. The sacrifice I had thought was appreciated, even valued, had simply been expected. And in the end, it counted for nothing. The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. My mind was too chaotic to focus on structural engineering calculations or client meetings. Instead, I reached out to my closest friend, Taylor, who came over with coffee and a sympathetic ear. "That's beyond messed up," Taylor said after I recounted the previous night's confrontation. "They've been taking advantage of you for years. Have they? Or am I overreacting?" Even now, I found myself making excuses for them, a habit formed over decades. "Rocco, they took your money to maintain their lifestyle while secretly planning to leave everything to your brother. Money you gave them because you thought you were helping family, not funding an inheritance for Jeremy. That's not overreacting. That's being justifiably hurt by a serious betrayal." Taylor's validation helped, but I needed more objective clarity. I called Martha, my financial advisor, and asked for an emergency appointment. That afternoon, in her office overlooking the Monongahela River, we went through my bank statements and calculated exactly how much I had given my parents over the years. "Based on these records," Martha said, pushing her glasses up her nose, "you've contributed approximately $75,800 in direct financial support over the past 5 years. That doesn't include the value of services you've provided, like home repairs or technology assistance." The number hit me like a physical blow. $75,800. Money that could have been invested in my retirement, put toward a home, or used for the graduate program I'd postponed. "What would that amount be worth if I had invested it instead?" I asked. Martha ran some calculations. At a conservative 7% annual return, about $93,000 today. Projected forward to your retirement age, approximately $350,000. I left Martha's office with a new perspective and a decision. I would stop all financial support to my parents, effective immediately. No warning, no gradual reduction, a complete cessation. It felt both terrifying and liberating. At home, I created a comprehensive spreadsheet documenting every payment I had made to my parents. Monthly transfers, mortgage payments, repairs, medical bills, property taxes and gifts. I categorized each expenditure, added dates and amounts, and calculated totals by year and category. The final document ran to 17 pages when printed. Next, I went through my accounts and canceled the automatic monthly transfer to their checking account. I removed them as authorized users on my Amazon account, which they had used freely for years. I called their utility companies and removed my credit card from the backup payment options. For 5 days, there was silence from their end. I ignored the emotional text messages that continued to arrive, focusing instead on establishing my new boundaries. I set up a therapy appointment to help process my feelings, started researching graduate programs again, and scheduled viewings of homes for sale in my price range. On the 6th day, my phone rang with my parents' number. I let it go to voicemail. "Rocco, the water bill payment was declined," Mom's voice said. Confusion evident. "Can you check on that? Also, we need to talk about Sunday dinner. I'm making pot roast." No acknowledgement of our argument, no mention of the will, just an expectation that I would fix the payment issue and show up for dinner as if nothing had happened. I didn't call back. 2 days later, Dad called. The electric company sent a late notice. "Did you forget to set up the payment this month?" Again, I didn't respond. The calls and messages increased in frequency and urgency over the next 2 weeks. Each one revealed just how much my parents had come to depend on my financial support for their basic expenses. Each one also conspicuously avoided addressing the real issue between us. I focused on self-care during this period. I scheduled long postponed dental checkups and car maintenance. I met friends for dinner instead of spending Sunday evenings at my parents' house. I began rebuilding my savings account, feeling a surge of pride when I made my first substantial deposit in years. 3 weeks into my withdrawal, I scrolled through Instagram during lunch and froze at a photo posted by Jeremy. He and his girlfriend lounged on a Hawaiian beach, fruity drinks in hand, with the caption, "Much needed vacation. Thanks for the loan, Mom and Dad. Number blessed number island life." I clicked through his vacation album, feeling sick as I saw photos of helicopter tours, luxury resort accommodations, and expensive restaurants. The timestamp showed these were taken just last week, meaning my parents had given Jeremy money for a lavish vacation, while simultaneously contacting me about their unpaid utility bills. I took screenshots and sent them to Taylor, who responded immediately. "Now we know where your support money was really going. Straight to Jeremy's vacations." This discovery hardened my resolve. I wasn't just standing up for myself against an unfair inheritance plan. I was refusing to continue funding a system that took my contributions and converted them into luxury experiences for my brother while my own needs and goals remained on hold. When my mother texted the next day with, "The mortgage is due," no greeting, no acknowledgement of the situation between us, I knew exactly how to respond. I sent her the spreadsheet detailing every dollar I had given them, with the final total highlighted. I added no message, letting the numbers speak for themselves. 3 days after sending the spreadsheet, I received a furious phone call from my father. I answered, deciding it was time to have this conversation. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he demanded without preamble. "The mortgage payment is a week late now, and the bank called us yesterday." "I'm no longer providing financial support," I said calmly, though my heart raced. "As the spreadsheet showed, I've contributed over $75,000 to your expenses in recent years. That's ended now. You can't just cut us off like this." His voice rose with indignation. "We're your parents." Yes, parents who decided I don't deserve to inherit anything from them despite my years of support. Parents who gave Jeremy $50,000 for a business while telling me they couldn't help with necessary medical expenses. Parents who are funding Jeremy's Hawaiian vacation while asking me to pay their mortgage. A long silence followed. Then, "If this is how you're going to be, maybe we don't need you in our lives at all." The threat was meant to hurt me, to bring me back in line. Instead, it crystallized everything. "According to your will, you've already decided that. I'm just aligning my actions with your choices." The fallout was swift and widespread. Within days, extended family members began calling and texting. My Aunt Susan supported my position, telling me she had witnessed my parents' preferential treatment of Jeremy for years and was glad I was finally standing up for myself. My Uncle Patrick, however, berated me for abandoning my elderly parents over a simple misunderstanding. Family gatherings had always been important to us, with holiday meals bringing together aunts, uncles, and cousins from across 3 states. Now, battle lines were being drawn. People were taking sides. Old resentments and alliances surfaced, revealing family dynamics I had never fully recognized before. A week later, Jeremy flew home from California. He didn't contact me directly, but mutual acquaintances reported seeing him around town. Then, late one evening, he showed up at my apartment unannounced. "We need to talk, bro," he said when I opened the door, attempting casual friendliness as if there were no issues between us. I let him in, but remained standing. "What about? This whole thing with Mom and Dad. You've got them really stressed out. Dad's blood pressure is through the roof, and Mom's been crying constantly. And yet you're here instead of handling their financial crisis yourself." Jeremy sighed dramatically, dropping onto my couch without invitation. "Look, I would help if I could, but my business is going through a rough patch. I can barely cover my own expenses right now." "Really? Because your Instagram shows you taking helicopter tours in Hawaii last week." His expression flickered between surprise and guilt before settling on defiance. "That was a special circumstance. Melissa needed a break from work stress, and Mom and Dad offered to help. It wasn't a big deal. They gave you money for a luxury vacation while simultaneously asking me to pay their mortgage. How is that not a big deal?" The conversation devolved from there, with Jeremy eventually admitting that our parents had been regularly sending him money for years, even while claiming financial hardship to me. The most damning revelation came when he accidentally mentioned they had refinanced their home 2 years ago. "Wait," I interrupted. "They refinanced? Their house was nearly paid off 5 years ago when Dad had his heart attack. That's why the mortgage payments were manageable on their retirement income." Jeremy looked like he wished he could take back the words. "They needed money for some investments." "What investments?" After some evasion, the truth emerged. My parents had refinanced their nearly paid-off home to provide capital for Jeremy's series of failed business ventures. The mortgage I had been helping them pay, believing it was their original mortgage temporarily strained by medical expenses, was actually a new loan taken out specifically to fund Jeremy. I asked Jeremy to leave after that, unable to process this newest betrayal with him watching. He went reluctantly, warning that this isn't over and that I needed to stop being selfish and resume supporting our parents. The next morning, I drove to my parents' house, determined to get the full truth. They looked surprised when they opened the door, then wary when they saw my expression. "Is it true that you refinanced the house to give money to Jeremy?" I asked without preamble. Their exchanged glance confirmed it before they spoke. "We were trying to help him get established," Dad said defensively. "While letting me believe I was helping with your original mortgage, while telling me you couldn't afford your basic expenses on your retirement income? You don't understand how hard it's been for him," Mom said, her voice taking on the protective tone she always used when discussing Jeremy. "His industry is so competitive, and he needed startup capital. And I needed parents who were honest with me. I needed family who valued my contributions instead of exploiting them." We argued for nearly an hour, voices raised and decades of family dynamics spilling into the open. Jeremy arrived midway through, having been summoned by another text from Mom. His presence only escalated the situation, as he alternated between playing the victim and attacking my character. The most revealing moment came when Jeremy, frustrated by my refusal to back down, blurted out, "You've always been jealous that Mom and Dad love me more." The room fell silent. My parents didn't deny it. They looked uncomfortable, but they didn't contradict him. And in that moment, I finally accepted what had always been true but never acknowledged. In the hierarchy of our family, I had always been second. My achievements were expected. Jeremy's were celebrated. My support was assumed. Jeremy's occasional phone calls were treasured. I left their house that day with a strange sense of clarity. The pain was still there, but now it was accompanied by understanding. I hadn't imagined the imbalance. I hadn't been oversensitive. The family I had sacrificed so much to support had fundamentally different values than I did, and no amount of money or time from me would ever change that. 2 days after the confrontation at my parents' house, I received an unexpected call from Barbara. an old family friend who had known us since Jeremy and I were children. She wanted to meet for coffee, saying cryptically that there was something important we needed to discuss. We met at a small cafe downtown. Barbara seemed nervous, fidgeting with her cup and making small talk before finally coming to the point. "I heard about the situation with your parents," she said. "The whole neighborhood is talking." I hadn't realized our family drama had become public knowledge, but small towns have few secrets. "I'm sorry to hear that. Don't apologize. I'm here because I think you should know something." She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Your mother asked me for advice about moving some money between accounts. She mentioned a savings account I didn't know they had. This caught my attention." "What kind of savings account?" "Some kind of special retirement fund." She was worried about penalties for early withdrawal. This new information nagged at me all evening. The next day, I called the financial advisor my parents had consulted about their retirement planning years ago. By an extraordinary stroke of luck, his assistant remembered me from when I had accompanied my parents to a meeting and was willing to confirm that yes, Robert and Margaret Clark maintained multiple accounts with their firm. I drove to my parents' house unannounced, finding them in the backyard gardening. Their surprise at seeing me quickly turned to wariness. "We need to talk about your hidden retirement account," I said without preamble. The look they exchanged confirmed Barbara's information before they could deny it. "How did you find out about that?" Dad asked, removing his gardening gloves slowly. "Does it matter? What matters is that you've been claiming financial hardship and accepting my support while sitting on savings you never disclosed." After some reluctance, they admitted to having a retirement account with approximately $200,000, money they had kept separate from their regular finances and never mentioned during all our discussions of their financial needs. "We were saving it for emergencies," Mom said weakly. "Like Jeremy's Hawaiian vacation." I couldn't keep the bitterness from my voice. "Or were you just preserving it to add to his inheritance?" The conversation that followed was brutal in its honesty. Pushed beyond her usual deflections, Mom finally admitted that her preferential treatment of Jeremy stemmed from his resemblance to her deceased brother, both in appearance and temperament. "You don't understand what it's like to lose someone so suddenly," she said, tears streaming down her face. "When I look at Jeremy, I see Bobby. I always have." Dad, in a moment of rare vulnerability, confessed his own motivations. "You've always made success look easy, Rocco. Top of your class, good job right out of college, respect from everyone who meets you. Do you know how that feels to a father who struggled his whole life in a job he hated? Jeremy, I understand. His failures make sense to me. But you," he shook his head, "you remind me of everything I never achieved." These admissions should have been cathartic, but they only deepened my pain. My mother loved my brother more because he resembled someone else. My father resented me for succeeding where he had failed. What kind of foundation was that for a family? As we continued talking, more truths emerged. Jeremy had been manipulating our parents for years, playing on Mom's emotional connection and Dad's insecurities. He had systematically portrayed himself as struggling even during periods of financial success, ensuring a continuous flow of support. "He calls us twice a week," Mom said, as if this justified everything. "He tells us about his life, his challenges. He needs us. And I don't? Because I handle my problems independently, instead of making them your responsibility?" The most devastating revelation came when I asked directly about the timing of their will update. After some evasion, they admitted they had changed it immediately after I paid for their new roof last year. An $8,000 expense I had covered without hesitation when leaks threatened structural damage to their home. "You waited until the roof was fixed," I said slowly, understanding dawning. "You waited until you had extracted that last major expense from me before ensuring I would get nothing in return." They tried to deny this characterization, but their arguments were weak and unconvincing. The calculated timing spoke for itself. As our conversation continued, Jeremy arrived, summoned again by a text from Mom. But this time, rather than attacking me, he made a crucial mistake. In attempting to defend his parents' decisions, he mentioned selling that old pocket watch to help with his expenses. "What pocket watch?" I asked, though I already knew. "My grandfather's gold pocket watch, which Dad had always promised would come to me someday." Jeremy realized his error too late. It wasn't a big deal, just some antique that was gathering dust. It was Grandpa Clark's watch, I said quietly. The one Dad promised to me on my 16th birthday. My parents looked guilty but defended Jeremy's action. He needed the money more than you needed a watch, Dad said. That was the breaking point. The watch itself wasn't particularly valuable financially, but it had been promised to me, a family heirloom with sentimental importance. That they had allowed Jeremy to sell it, without even informing me, revealed the complete disregard they had for my feelings and our supposed agreements. I stood up, suddenly calm in a way I hadn't been since discovering the will. I think we're done here. All of us. I won't be contributing to your expenses again. I won't be coming to Sunday dinners. I won't be available for home repairs or technology support or emotional comfort. You've made your choices very clear, and now I'm making mine. Jeremy scoffed. You're cutting off your own parents over money? Real classy, bro. No. I corrected him. I'm establishing boundaries with people who have consistently demonstrated that they don't value me, my contributions, or my place in this family. There's a difference. I left without looking back, their protests fading behind me. In my car, instead of the anger or grief I expected, I felt something unexpected: relief. The weight of unrealistic expectations and unacknowledged imbalance had finally lifted. Whatever happened next, I would face it with clear eyes and firm boundaries. The consequences of my decision became apparent quickly. 10 days after our confrontation, I learned through Aunt Susan that my parents had received a formal notice from their mortgage lender. They had missed their payment and were at risk of starting foreclosure proceedings if they didn't resolve the delinquency soon. Jeremy had apparently promised to help when the reality of their financial situation became clear, but after making a single small contribution, he stopped answering their calls. His Instagram, meanwhile, showed him at exclusive restaurants and clubs in Los Angeles. His business difficulties apparently forgotten. Their social standing in the community began to suffer as well. They had been respected figures in our small town, with Mom active in the local garden club and Dad serving on the neighborhood association board. But as they began declining social invitations due to financial constraints, and as rumors of family discord spread, their carefully maintained image started to crumble. 3 weeks after our last conversation, Mom was hospitalized with chest pains. The doctors diagnosed it as stress-related, not a heart attack, but the incident shook me. Despite everything, these were still my parents. I visited her in the hospital, bringing flowers but not my checkbook. She looked small in the hospital bed, tubes connecting her to various monitors. Dad sat beside her, his eyes red-rimmed with exhaustion. You came, Mom said, surprise evident in her voice. Of course I came. I'm angry with you both, but I don't wish you harm. We talked cautiously, avoiding the most painful topics. I asked about her condition. She asked about my work. Dad remained largely silent, occasionally contributing a comment or question. The conversation was stilted but civil. As I prepared to leave, Mom grasped my hand. We miss you at Sunday dinners. I miss what I thought those dinners represented, I replied honestly. A family that valued all its members equally. In the parking lot, Dad caught up with me. For a moment he just stood there, hands in his pockets, looking older than I had ever seen him. Then, hesitantly, the doctors say her condition was exacerbated by stress. Financial stress. I recognized the implied request. I'm not resuming financial support, Dad. He nodded slowly. I understand why you feel that way. I don't know what we're going to do. You could try asking Jeremy, or selling some assets, or downsizing to a more affordable home. There are options that don't involve exploiting your older son. Something in my phrasing seemed to hit him. Exploiting. He repeated the word as if testing its accuracy. After a long pause, he continued, I never thought of it that way. We just needed help, and you always provided it. And I would have continued providing it if I had been treated as an equal member of this family. But I wasn't. I was treated as a resource to be tapped for Jeremy's benefit. For the first time, Dad didn't immediately defend their actions or dismiss my perspective. Instead, he simply nodded again and said, I need to think about some things. That conversation marked a subtle shift. Over the next few weeks, I maintained my financial boundaries but began dropping off groceries for my parents occasionally. I fixed a leaking faucet when Mom mentioned it during a brief phone call. Small gestures of care that carried no monetary value but demonstrated that my withdrawal was about boundaries, not punishment. Dad, to my surprise, began showing signs of genuine reflection. During one of my brief visits, he acknowledged the unfairness of their treatment of me versus Jeremy, though Mom quickly changed the subject. Another time, he asked if I would be willing to look over their budget to suggest areas where they could reduce expenses, not to pay for them, but to help them learn to live within their means. The situation came to a head when extended family gathered for Aunt Susan's birthday dinner. Jeremy flew in for the occasion, his first visit since our confrontation weeks earlier. He arrived late, made a show of kissing our mother's cheek, and proceeded to dominate the conversation with stories of his California lifestyle. When the topic inevitably turned to my parents' financial difficulties, Jeremy loudly proclaimed his own struggles. I wish I could help more, but my industry is just so volatile right now. Last month's clients all delayed their payments, and my rent in LA is insane. Aunt Susan, who had seen his social media posts, raised an eyebrow. Funny your Instagram shows you at Nobu last weekend. And wasn't that a new designer watch in your selfie on Tuesday? Jeremy flushed, then quickly recovered with practiced charm. Just because I treat myself occasionally doesn't mean I'm not struggling. You have to network in my business, make connections. It's an investment in my future. The family gathering became increasingly tense as more relatives began questioning Jeremy's narrative. Uncle Patrick, who had initially sided with my parents against me, asked pointed questions about Jeremy's supposed business difficulties. Cousin Rachel mentioned seeing his girlfriend's posts about their weekend trip to Napa Valley wine country. As the evidence mounted, Jeremy grew defensive, then angry. What is this, an inquisition? So I enjoy life a little instead of being a boring workaholic like Rocco. Sue me. No one's criticizing your lifestyle, I said calmly. Just the expectation that others should fund it while you claim poverty. The dinner ended with Jeremy storming out and my parents looking confused and embarrassed. Afterward, several family members approached me privately to express their support and share stories of Jeremy's manipulative behavior they had witnessed over the years, but never discussed openly. The most significant development came 3 days later when my father called and asked to meet me for lunch. Alone. Over sandwiches at a quiet deli, he pushed a folder across the table. Your mother doesn't know I'm showing you this, he said, but I think you should see it. Inside was documentation of Jeremy's financial situation, bank statements, credit card bills, and income records. Dad had somehow obtained. They painted a very different picture than the struggling artist Jeremy portrayed to our parents. His design business was actually quite successful, bringing in well over 6 figures annually. The financial emergencies that had prompted my parents to refinance their home and drain their accessible savings had been largely fabricated or grossly exaggerated. How did you get these? I asked, stunned by the extent of the deception. He left his laptop open during his last visit. I shouldn't have looked, but something about that family dinner made me suspicious. Dad looked down at his barely touched sandwich. I've been a fool, Rocco. We both have, your mother and I. We wanted so badly to believe Jeremy needed us that we ignored all evidence to the contrary. This revelation was the catalyst for what happened next. Dad asked if I would be willing to attend a family meeting at their house that weekend, with an important caveat. Jeremy would not be invited. For the first time, my father wanted to discuss the situation without my brother's manipulative presence influencing the conversation. The family meeting began awkwardly. Mom seemed confused about why Jeremy wasn't included, while Dad was uncharacteristically firm about wanting to speak with just me. We sat in their living room, the space filled with memories both good and painful. We're in trouble, Dad began without preamble. The bank sent a final notice about the mortgage. We have 30 days to bring the account current or they'll begin foreclosure proceedings. Mom wrung her hands anxiously. We tried to reach Jeremy, but he's not answering our calls anymore. Not since the family dinner last week. Have you considered selling the house? I asked. Downsizing to something more manageable on your retirement income. This is our home, Mom protested. We raised you boys here. All our memories are in these walls. Memories won't pay the mortgage, Dad said gently. Then, turning to me, we called you here because we need advice, not money. You understand finances better than we do. What options do we have? The request surprised me. Not for financial assistance, but for guidance. It represented a fundamental shift in how they viewed me. Not as an ATM, but as someone with valuable knowledge and perspective. I considered their situation carefully. First, you should contact the bank and request a meeting with their loan modification department. I know someone there who might be able to help. Then, we need to create a realistic budget based on your actual income, not including my previous contributions or any anticipated help from Jeremy. Over the next few hours, we had the most honest financial conversation of our lives. I learned about debts they had hidden from me, and they learned about sacrifices I had made that they had never fully appreciated. There were tears, especially from Mom when Dad showed her the evidence of Jeremy's deception. There was anger, too, as they confronted the reality that their favored son had systematically manipulated them for years. The following week, I accompanied them to a meeting at the bank. Using my professional connections, I helped negotiate a temporary modification to their loan terms, buying them 3 months to get their finances in order. The relief on their faces was evident, but I made it clear this was assistance, not a return to financial support. "I'll help you navigate this," I told them. "I'll share knowledge and connections, but I won't be providing money anymore." That boundary remains firm. Dad nodded in understanding. Mom seemed less certain but didn't argue. My conditions for continued involvement in their lives were straightforward. They needed to attend family therapy to address the decades of favoritism and unhealthy dynamics. They needed to create a new, equitable will that acknowledged both their sons fairly. And they needed to establish financial independence without relying on either of their children for regular support. They resisted the therapy idea initially, especially Mom. "We don't need a stranger telling us how to be a family," she insisted. But as their financial reality became clearer, and as Jeremy continued to ignore their increasingly desperate messages, they reluctantly agreed. Our first therapy session was painful. Dr. Walsh, a family psychologist with 30 years of experience, didn't mince words about the dysfunctional patterns she observed. Mom cried through most of the session. Dad sat stoically, but I could see the impact of the doctor's observations in his furrowed brow and clenched jaw. Jeremy refused to participate in therapy, sending a dismissive text. "I don't need to pay someone to tell me my family sucks." His absence actually facilitated more honest conversation, allowing us to discuss his manipulative behaviors without his defensive reactions or charm offensive derailing the process. After 6 weeks of therapy, regular budget meetings, and careful negotiations with their creditors, my parents reached a turning point. They decided to sell their house, not because they had to, but because they recognized it represented financial overextension and decades of unwise choices. "We don't need this much space anyway," Dad said as they signed the listing agreement. "A smaller place will be easier to maintain." They found a pleasant 2-bedroom condo in a retirement community 15 minutes away. The sale of their house allowed them to purchase it outright with no mortgage, eliminating their largest monthly expense. The remaining proceeds went toward paying off other debts and establishing a modest emergency fund. Throughout this transition, our relationship evolved. There were still difficult moments and painful conversations. Mom especially struggled to accept the new reality of our family dynamics, occasionally slipping into old patterns of making excuses for Jeremy or implying I should do more to help. But Dad would gently redirect these conversations, a new behavior that surprised and impressed me. The most significant change came 3 months after our first therapy session. My parents invited me to their new condo for dinner, not their traditional Sunday meal, but a Wednesday evening gathering that represented a fresh start. After dinner, they presented me with a manila envelope. "We've been working with a new attorney," Dad explained as I opened it. "This is our revised will." The document inside was straightforward and equitable. Their assets, though significantly reduced from before, would be divided equally between Jeremy and me upon their passing. Additionally, specific items of sentimental value were allocated to each of us by name, including items I had mentioned wanting to inherit over the years but had assumed would go to Jeremy under their previous plan. "We can't undo the past," Mom said, her voice catching. "We can't give back the money you contributed or the opportunities you missed because of us. But we can acknowledge that you deserve equal treatment as our son." Dad added something that affected me deeply. "We're sorry, Rocco, for taking advantage of your generosity, for not seeing how our choices hurt you, for failing to appreciate the man you are." It wasn't a perfect resolution. Jeremy eventually resumed contact with our parents when he needed something from them, though they were now more cautious about his requests and more transparent with me about their interactions with him. He remained uninterested in addressing the deeper family dynamics or acknowledging his role in the situation. 1 year later, our family had found a new equilibrium. My parents lived within their means in their condo, having learned to budget carefully on their retirement income. I visited them regularly, but maintained clear boundaries about financial support, helping only with occasional unexpected expenses rather than regular contributions. Our relationship, while still healing, had become more honest and balanced than ever before. The most touching moment of this journey came on my birthday, when I received a letter from my parents. Inside was not a request or an explanation or even an apology, but a simple expression of gratitude. "Thank you for teaching us what real family support looks like. Not endless financial sacrifice without boundaries, but honest communication, respect for each person's needs, and love that doesn't keep score but still expects basic fairness. We are better people because of your courage to stand up for yourself, and we are prouder than ever to be your parents." As I reflect on this difficult chapter of my life, I realize that the inheritance that truly matters isn't the material possessions or money that will be distributed after my parents' deaths. It's the lessons we've all learned about authentic love, appropriate boundaries, and genuine family support. By standing up for myself, I not only reclaimed my financial independence, but helped create a healthier family system that benefits everyone involved, even Jeremy, though he may never recognize it. The experience taught me that true generosity comes with boundaries, that love without respect isn't really love at all, and that sometimes the most caring action is to stop enabling harmful patterns, even when it causes temporary pain. These are inheritances far more valuable than any house or bank account, wisdom that will serve me for the rest of my life. What would you have done in my situation? Would you have continued supporting parents who secretly planned to disinherit you? Or would you have established boundaries as I did? Comment below with your thoughts on family financial dynamics and whether you think I made the right choice. If you found value in my story, please like this video, subscribe to see more real-life experiences, and share with someone who might be struggling with similar family challenges. Thank you for listening to my journey, and I wish you wisdom and courage in navigating your own family relationships.